Hamadi Beki from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Tunisia and a MEDAC student. First of all, thank you for your significant presentation. A few days after the eruption of the revolution in Tunisia, the High Representative of the European Union, Madame Catherine Ashton, was in Tunis to declare the European approach to support the democratic transition in Tunisia. A plan or an approach which later on became known as the 3 M's, money, market, access, and mobility. My question, in your capacity as the Minister for European Affairs of the forthcoming President of the Council of Europe, could you give us an idea about your program to support the democratic transition in Tunisia, particularly after recently the signature of the agreement for the privileged partnership between Tunisia and the European Union? I beg your pardon, I have a second question. Starting from the 6th and the 7th of this month, your country is hosting the 19th Council or Ministerial Council for the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. For a long time, the request of Palestine to join as a Mediterranean partner to OSCE has been pending. Don't you think, Your Excellency, that is high time to accept Palestine as a Mediterranean partner to the OSCE to consolidate the peace process in the region? Thank you.
Thank you. Gina Naivira, Malta Confederation of Women's Organizations, as well as Executive Member of the European Women's Lobby. Thank you for your presentation. A statement in your conclusion caught my attention in a particular way. You said we need to have tangible results for all Europeans. Now, we know that women suffer and are suffering. This is very much a she crisis, not just a he economic crisis, are suffering greatly in this economic crisis. We are seeing public, I'm not talking just locally, but on a European level, cutbacks, public service cutbacks, not just with regard to employment, where the majority are women, but also cutbacks in benefits. And from research, we know that benefits are usually taken by women for caring for child and elderly care. So we are seeing precarious. Here in Malta, we see an increase in employment for women, jobs for women, because we had a very low participation. So there was a push for that, and we are seeing it. But we're also seeing increase in part-time work where women are concerned, and also in precarious work, which means that promotion, career will be suffering in the future. We can also see on a European basis that some women, because of cuts in care for child and elderly, would have to need to leave their job to look after family responsibilities. This will also involve and care negatively on their gender pay gap. What will the EU presidency be doing with regard to gender impact assessing policies prior to implementation? What will your presidency be doing with regard to gender budgeting and gender mainstreaming to push these agendas forward, which have been for a number of years now part of the EU policy-making process? Thank you.
I believe that's Mr. Zahar. Is there anybody else? Because we have to try and round up. So can we take the final two questions, Mr. Zahar?
Thank you very much, Minister, for being with us this morning. Rather a simple question, Minister, but maybe you'll need a few more minutes to answer this one. What started off as a banking crisis in Europe in 2008 went into a government debt crisis. What now we have is an austerity situation. And how does the European Union plan to go from a situation where we have austerity all around to getting a growth situation in Europe? I cannot see how we are going to achieve this. Are we going to go into a Japan situation where they have had a flat economy for 20 years? How do we get out of this one? Thank you.
Alex Shabrastragora, former Foreign Minister, International Secretary, Partita Porista. Two simple questions. How many meetings do you envisage organizing during the 6 months of the presidency inside Ireland itself? Second question, how much will the presidency cost you?
I believe there's another gentleman, so very brief remarks. I would like to...
Of course, a very short question, Minister. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Can you introduce yourselves, please?
Mark Sager from the Malta Business Bureau. Basically, we represent Maltese business and community, and I wanted to ask, Ireland as an export-driven economy, just like Malta, also has natural problems due to its geographical location. Will the presidency give priority to the Single Market Act 2 proposal of introducing a blue belt which will harmonize EU port administration and documentation for the facilitation of importation and exportation? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Lena Cavalier from the Institute of European Studies at the University of Malta. Thank you for your speech. I'd like to ask, in your speech you mentioned the external trade agenda of the Irish Presidency. I was wondering whether the Irish Presidency is also focusing on the EFTA countries. Thank you.
So, Minister, you have quite a fair...
Okay. I will try to answer them as much as I can. The question of whether we will, as incoming presidency, support Tunisia and the model of money market access and mobility. Yes, of course, that has been the approach of the Irish government from the beginning of the Arab Spring. We've been very supportive of a coherent and a coordinated EU approach. It has worked reasonably well in some countries. Obviously, there are still many difficulties, but I think that so far it has been quite successful in Tunisia, and as presidency we will support the work of the High Representative in that regard. But again, this is one of those areas that is quite changed since the Lisbon Treaty, and the presidency has a much diminished role in foreign policy issues. We can reflect, of course, the position of the Council, of the Foreign Affairs Council, as presidency, but the High Representative takes the lead on it, and that will continue to be the case, and we're supportive of that. The question in relation to the OSCE, well, the OSCE Ministerial, as you correctly said, takes place in Dublin this week. It will be the biggest ever ministerial meeting in Dublin, and a good test run, I think, for our presidency. The question of whether to support Palestine as a Mediterranean partner of the OSCE, of course, that requires unanimity, as all decisions do in the OSCE. I think that's the answer to that, to be quite honest. I don't see that happening anytime soon. I know that Malta and Ireland shared a very robust position in voting in a positive way at the UN last week in respect of observer status for Palestine, and I think our position is clear in that regard in terms of our support for a two-state solution, in terms of our recognition of the right of both states to exist, and that's reflected in all of our foreign policy and in our approach to Palestine. But it's not, I don't believe, something that's going to happen at the OSCE anytime soon. The question of whether we will continue promoting the concept of gender impact assessment during our presidency? The answer is, of course, yes. And we've had very good engagement. We had the FAM committee from the European Parliament in Dublin last week, where we went through a very detailed list of priorities in the whole sphere of promoting women, of recognising the economic impact of the crisis on women, and also in supporting women in the workplace particularly. And we hope that, for example, on the issue of Commissioner Reding's proposal about women on boards, we very much hope that we can progress that during the Irish Presidency, along with a range of other measures. So yes, it is an important priority for the Irish Presidency. On the question about a banking crisis, debt crisis leading to austerity, I have maybe a slightly different view of this, because I don't believe that we can ignore the public spending crisis in Europe. I don't believe that we can continue loading more debt upon debt. I don't believe that the solution of multiple rounds of quantitative easing, for example, to basically build up a bigger and bigger debt problem is a solution. And my country has already taken about 20% out of 20% of GDP out of our economy since the crisis began. I mean, it is unprecedented. It's been extremely difficult. It continues to be. Tonight I'll fly home to Dublin, and tomorrow we have our budget for 2013, where we will take another 3.5 billion out of our small economy. It's a very traumatic period, but I actually feel very, very strongly that this was a crisis that was waiting to happen in Europe. For example, we spend more in Europe on in the broad sphere of welfare, whether provision of services, health, social protection, and so on. We spend more in Europe than the whole of the rest of the world combined, and that includes, of course, pensions. It's not sustainable. We have to, if we want the European social model to continue, if we want it to be durable, and I think Europe is the best place in the world to live, and I'm very proud of that fact, but if we want it to be sustainable, we cannot continue spending the way we have been. So I believe very firmly that we have to do we have to take the very painful measures that we are taking at the moment, and my country, probably more than most in the European Union at this point in time. There is, as I said in my introductory remarks, there is light at the end of the tunnel. If you look at Ireland, for example, domestic demand is still very weak, but we have returned to growth. We grew by 1.4% last year. Now bear in mind, this is okay. We had our banking crash in 2008. We entered recession at that time. We found that we could no longer afford to borrow in the international markets by autumn 2010. We were forced into a bailout program in November 2010. Literally it was an economy in free fall. I mean, almost bankrupt. But in a relatively short period of time, we have begun to turn it around. And I'm not saying that we have all of the solutions, or that that we're at the end of the road. We're far from it. But we have managed not just to stabilise the economy, but to begin to grow the economy. And I think an interesting example, investment in Ireland dried up completely, needless to say, when our banking crisis happened. 2011 saw the most successful year in history for first-time foreign direct investment in Ireland. So, within a matter of months of entering a bailout program, we had seen things stabilise, and we saw investment and investor confidence go right back up again, because we were doing what was required of us, and because of the steps that I think were extremely necessary in terms of fiscal consolidation. So I know it's a very difficult period right now. I think that there is an argument for some infrastructure investment and so on, but I don't believe that spending vast sums of money on so-called stimulus programs that are unaffordable is the solution to the crisis. I really deeply don't believe that. I think what we need to do along the lines of what I outlined in terms of the Irish priorities for our presidency, we have to end protectionism in the European Union within our borders. We have to implement the grand statements that we have in terms of the single market agenda. We have very concrete and tangible steps that have to be taken, and I think we have an impetus now that we didn't have. I mean, people talk about the precursor to the Europe 2020 agenda, the Lisbon strategy, which was a failure because we were all a little bit too comfortable. There was no incentive for member states to maybe annoy particular sectors in their economy. It was easy for people to be protectionist, and it was easy to say we'll put that off to another day. We can't do that any longer. So I think we have the drive now, and we have the impetus at European level to actually bite the bullet and do what needs to be done on the single market agenda, particularly the digital single market. And we saw how long it took to agree on a unitary patent agreement, for example. This is just one small element of the digital single market. So we really now need to move these things forward. And the FTA agenda, the free trade agreements that I mentioned, particularly the EU-US, has a huge potential in terms of trade between the EU and the US. It's estimated if an FTA were implemented between the EU and the US, it could contribute more than 2% of the GDP of both economies by 2020, which is significant, and which I think we have to aim for. We have to be bold and brave about it. And that means that some member states will have to shift their positions, to be quite blunt about it, and that's what we hope to help them to do. Sorry, I know that's a long answer, but I think it's a question that's perplexing all of us, and they're just my views on it. On the question of how many meetings we will be responsible for 1,600 meetings during our presidency, and 180 of those will take place in Dublin. That includes 11 informal ministerial meetings in Dublin. So it's the bare minimum. We had more than double that during our 2004 presidency. So it's going to be a low-cost, efficient presidency. It will cost in the region of 60 million. Which is at least a third less than we spent on our 2004 presidency. So it's a sign of the times. We're a lot more frugal these days. Will we push forward on the Single Market Act 2 proposal in respect of import-export bureaucracy? Yes, we will try to. Obviously, Single Market Act 2 is at the very beginning of its process. Single Market Act 1 for us is the first priority because it's been so slow to be implemented, and we really want to move forward. We will do that in parallel with Single Market Act 2 and the measures there. So yes is the answer. We will do as much as we can during our presidency to bring that forward. And will we be including EFTA countries in our plans? Yes, of course. Of course, the priority is EU member states, that's clear, but we have a very important relationship with EFTA, and that will continue to be the case under the Irish presidency. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. This brings us to an end of this public dialogue, which I must say this year it has been characterized with a number of public dialogues with ministers coming from member states and candidate countries. This year we hosted a public dialogue with the Turkish Minister for European Affairs, and then in summer we have the British Minister David Whittington. And it was again another fruitful public dialogue. So this really brings us to a perfect ending for the year, but a forward-looking event, because then in January, of course, and and I must compliment you on your ambassador and the good work, the sterling work he's doing here in Malta to represent your country. So we hope to in January actually have an event which will even formally launch the Irish presidency of the Council in Malta. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. A final word of thanks also to the staff of the University of Malta for their cooperation in helping us host this event, to the ambassador and his staff at the embassy, to our staff at MEUSAC as well for being behind the scenes and doing a lot of the work, and also to the contingent from MEDAC, which is the Mediterranean Academy for the Mathematical Studies. We have a very good participation for the students. Thank you for being here, and we hope to see you again. So thank you, and finally, of course, Minister, thank you for finding time in your very busy schedule today to be with us today. Thank you.